The South Pole has always been a place where curiosity reaches its limit. For centuries, maps left it blank, not from neglect, but from an ancient kind of respect, as though human imagination itself could not pierce the white beyond. Even now, with satellites orbiting overhead and radars slicing through the crust of continents, there remains a corner of the Earth that refuses to be known. Antarctica sits there in silence, beneath miles of ice so old it remembers no civilization, no witness, no name. But sometimes, when the wind slips across that endless plain, it feels as though something underneath might still be listening. They say we've mapped almost every inch of our planet. The deserts, the trenches, even the shadowed side of the moon, all recorded in coordinates and pixels. Yet under the South Pole's glaciers, there's a kind of blindness. Scientists know it's there, but the instruments return strange distortions. Echo returns that flicker and vanish, magnetic readings that twist into chaos, satellite images blurred as if the ice itself were refusing to yield. We have radar that can peer through Mars, and probes that orbit Jupiter's moons. But under our own feet, beneath our own world's southern crown, we can't see a thing with certainty. And so the question lingers like frost. What is it that the Earth keeps hidden there? Explorers once thought the continent might be the gateway to another world. Before the 20th century, it was only rumor and speculation, a supposed land of eternal spring, untouched by man. Then came the great age of exploration. Scott, Amundsen, Shackleton, names carved into the ice, men who walked until the wind erased their footprints. They reached the pole, planted their flags, and found only silence. What they didn't find was perhaps more important. Beneath their boots was not simply frozen ground, but a vault, 3 miles thick, stretching across 5 million square miles, sealing away something the sun hadn't touched for tens of millions of years. The deeper scientists drill, the more the ice turns into a library of lost atmospheres. Each layer traps air bubbles, dust, even pollen, frozen whispers of ages long gone. Ice cores pulled from Antarctica tell stories of climates, volcanic ash, and the delicate breathing patterns of a planet alive. But after 800,000 years of preserved history, the record stops. The drills break, the pressure rises, and the ice begins to deform. It's as if the planet has drawn a curtain over what came before. There are layers we can measure, but there are deeper layers we can only imagine. Even the most advanced mapping systems struggle. Beneath the glaciers, the radar signals scatter, refract, and return incomplete. Some researchers have suggested that vast pockets of liquid water, sealed away from sunlight, lie beneath the ice, entire hidden lakes. Others whisper of structures in the bedrock, geometric ridges, metallic echoes, magnetic anomalies. None of it can be confirmed because the continent is guarded. By treaties, by politics, by the harshest climate on Earth. The very air seems to push explorers away, as if protecting what lies below. In 1959, the Antarctic Treaty declared the continent a neutral ground. No weapons, no mining, no permanent settlement. On the surface, it was an act of peace, an agreement to keep the last untouched land free from human greed. But under that noble phrasing, a question lingers. Why such strict secrecy over a place of only ice? Why so many zones off limits to civilians? Why the restricted flight corridors that twist through the interior, the radio silence, the bases that operate without explanation? For a continent declared open for science, it's remarkable how much of it remains unseen. Sometimes, when the camera of a satellite catches a glint of something beneath the ice, an unusual reflection, a shape, a shadow, the data vanishes, replaced by perfect white. Scientists call it interference. But interference with what? Even radar designed to penetrate kilometers of rock finds itself confused here. Some say it's just geology, iron-rich formations, natural reflectivity. Others, quietly, wonder if there's something else below, a secret the planet itself does not wish to share. There are theories, of course, some purely scientific. The crust at the South Pole might be thicker than expected, shielding it from deeper scans. The density of ancient ice may distort magnetic fields. Subglacial lakes could generate strange echo patterns. But science, when it hesitates, leaves space for wonder. And in that space, the imagination of humankind begins to whisper. Could it be possible that the ice hides not just ecosystems, but memories? Fragments of a lost age when Antarctica was green and inhabited. What if that memory has been buried deliberately, as if the Earth itself sealed it beneath a veil? In the archives of explorers and scientists, one detail recurs, a strange disorientation that descends on those who travel too far into the interior. Compasses fail, electronics glitch, sound behaves differently. Voices echo longer, as though bouncing off invisible walls of ice. Some have described a low, vibrating hum, a sound below hearing, that can be felt rather than heard, pulsing through the air like a heartbeat buried under snow. Perhaps it's nothing more than shifting ice and wind. Perhaps it's the Earth murmuring in its sleep. But even the most rational minds return from that place changed, speaking of the silence as if it were alive. To stand at the South Pole is to stand at the edge of comprehension. The horizon curves softly in all directions, and above it, the sun spins in slow circles, never rising, never setting. Time becomes strange there, measured not in hours, but in breaths of wind. It's said that those who spend too long begin to dream differently, dreams where light has weight and silence has color. Perhaps it's the mind reacting to isolation, or perhaps it's something older, something deep beneath the ice, exerting a quiet gravity over every living thing that approaches. We like to think that exploration is about reaching the end of the unknown. But what if the unknown is a kind of mirror? Beneath those glaciers might lie the reflection of something we've lost, a forgotten part of human history, or the memory of the planet before us. Every generation has tried to name the mystery: Atlantis, Lemuria, Hyperborea, each a different shape of the same absence. But the South Pole, with its quiet defiance, offers no answers, only reflections distorted by cold and time. Tonight, as you listen, picture that vast white silence stretching endlessly outward. The aurora shimmers faintly above, painting the snow with slow green fire. Beneath it, miles below your feet, the ancient ice shifts and breathes, dreaming its glacial dreams. Perhaps one day we'll break through and find nothing at all. Or perhaps in breaking through, we'll find too much. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And as you drift deeper into this story, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it there? No one really remembers when the South Pole stopped being a place of exploration and became a place of restriction. On paper, it's the most peaceful territory on Earth, governed not by nations, but by an international treaty meant to preserve science and neutrality. Yet peace, as history teaches, can sometimes be the most convenient disguise for silence. Beneath the careful words of the 1959 Antarctic Treaty lies something stranger: the first global agreement to collectively not look too deeply. It was the one moment when all great powers, even in the shadow of the Cold War, quietly agreed to stop digging. In a world that has fought for every resource, it seems almost miraculous that a continent larger than Europe rich in minerals, oil, and fresh water, remains untouched. Officially, the ban on mining and military activity is to protect the environment. But who protects the secrecy? When documents are classified not for decades but indefinitely, one wonders what kind of knowledge might demand such permanent protection. After all, the ice hides not only the history of climate, it hides the history of human behavior toward what it fears to know. Shortly after the treaty's signing, research stations began to appear like watchtowers at the edge of a mystery. The Americans built McMurdo and Amundsen Scott. The Soviets dug into Vostok. The British maintained Halley and Rothera. Each claimed to study weather, magnetism, or glaciology. But if one looks closer, their layouts resemble listening posts more than laboratories. Networks of antennas, radar domes, encrypted communications. It would be naive to assume that under the cover of science, the old game of surveillance and competition simply melted away in the cold. There was a time when nations dreamed of finding ancient fossils, meteorites, or even undiscovered species in the frozen interior. Yet something changed after the early 1960s. Expedition routes were redrawn. Vast no-fly corridors were established over specific regions, especially over Wilkes Land, Enderby Land, and parts of Queen Maud Land. Even now, commercial aircraft crossing the southern hemisphere avoid these zones by hundreds of kilometers, as if the sky itself were off limits. When asked why, officials mentioned safety, radiation, or magnetic interference. But no one explains why satellites still capture occasional blurs, pixelated patches of nothingness, as though an invisible hand erases what it doesn't want us to see. The first real crack in this controlled silence came during the strange years following World War II. Among the piles of documents captured from Nazi Germany were files referring to an expedition to Neuschwabenland, a portion of Antarctica claimed by Germany in 1938. The official story was that it was a whaling survey, nothing more. But the details that survived, air photos of ice-free valleys, recorded temperatures far above average, and unexplained magnetic anomalies, suggested something else. After the war, American intelligence quietly launched its own investigation, culminating in the largest Antarctic operation ever conducted, Operation High Jump, in 1946-47. Publicly, High Jump was described as a military training mission to test equipment in polar conditions. In truth, it sent over 4,700 men, 13 ships, and dozens of aircraft into an uncharted region of the continent. It lasted only a few months before being abruptly terminated. Officially due to weather, unofficially to unexpected losses. Admiral Richard Byrd, the mission commander, gave a brief statement to a Chilean newspaper afterward, warning that we must be prepared for the possibility of enemy aircraft coming from the polar regions with unimaginable speed. Then, without further explanation, he vanished from public discussion. The documents that might clarify his meaning remain classified. What was found or feared during that expedition has been debated ever since. Some say it was nothing, just ice, fog, and the illusions of exhaustion. Others believe the mission encountered something buried beneath the ice, something not meant to be uncovered. It's tempting to dismiss such ideas as conspiracy, yet the pattern that followed is peculiar. Within a decade, all nations agreed to stop any large-scale excavation or military presence there. No one claimed ownership. No one continued the search. It was as if an unspoken decision had been made to let the ice remain undisturbed. But what could compel the same nations that raced to the moon, built nuclear arsenals, and fought for every island in the Pacific to simply stop? Perhaps it wasn't fear of discovery, but of consequence. Because in Antarctica, even small disturbances ripple outward. The glaciers are ancient archives. Press too hard, and you erase what you came to study. Dig too deep, and the ice begins to move, unpredictable and alive. Scientists say that beneath certain layers, the temperature rises unexpectedly, forming rivers and caverns that shift without pattern. It's almost as if the continent defends itself. Some researchers have whispered that the South Pole functions like a natural lock, a place where energy, magnetic lines, and rotation converge, sealing the planet's memory. If that balance were broken, it could alter more than geography. It could disturb the delicate pulse that regulates the Earth's spin and magnetic field. There's poetry in that thought, but also danger. To disturb Antarctica might not just uncover the past, it might wake it. For decades, classified flight logs and satellite imagery have noted sudden electromagnetic bursts near certain latitudes. The official term is polar ionospheric disturbance. Yet these disturbances follow no clear solar pattern, and their signatures resemble artificial emissions more than natural ones. When they appear, instruments fail, communication drops, and strange echoes are recorded, voices of the magnetic field itself, humming in frequencies too low for human ears. And so the silence persists, a silence actively maintained. The continent is guarded not by walls, but by bureaucracy and myth. Researchers need permits that take years to approve, and even then, their movements are watched. The deeper you go into the interior, the fewer records exist. Even scientific papers about certain coordinates appear strangely cautious, skipping over measurements that don't fit models, dismissing them as instrument error. Yet sometimes, buried in appendices or obscure journals, fragments slip through. Magnetic gradients too strong, subsurface densities too perfect, echo depths too symmetrical to be random. It's easy to romanticize secrecy. It flatters our imagination to think of governments hiding ancient ruins or machines frozen in time. But perhaps the truth is quieter and more unsettling. Perhaps they hide what they cannot explain, because even to acknowledge it would unravel the boundaries of science itself. Maybe the world isn't ready to know that under the oldest ice lies not emptiness, but memory, the fossil of something that once walked freely before the poles froze. At night, when the wind calms and the auroras flicker like ghosts over the horizon, researchers stationed there describe a strange stillness. The air becomes so dry that sound seems to vanish mid-breath. The stars look closer, as though the universe has tilted inward, and in that eerie proximity, one might begin to feel the presence of something vast and patient, not watching us, but simply waiting. Perhaps the treaty was never just about politics or peace. Perhaps it was an agreement between powers to preserve the last threshold, a pact of silence to protect both the planet and ourselves from remembering too much. For what if the greatest danger is not in discovering what's beneath the ice, but in realizing that it was never truly buried? Some questions are meant to remain unspoken, suspended like the aurora over a sleeping continent. The light moves, but never answers. The ice breathes, but never speaks. And somewhere below, in that unbroken stillness, the Earth keeps its oldest secret, not lost, but purposefully forgotten. In an old museum in Istanbul, there lies a map that should not exist. Drawn on gazelle skin in 1513 by the Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis, it shows the coastlines of South America, Africa, and, impossibly, Antarctica. Not as an icebound desert, but as a naked continent, its shores free of glaciers, its edges traced in confident, almost modern precision. When scientists compared the contours to 20th century seismic surveys of the subglacial bedrock, they matched. And that, quietly, is where the trouble began. historians tried to soften the anomaly. Perhaps the mapmaker copied from older sources, they said. Ancient charts passed through Arabic, Greek, or even Atlantean legends. But the more closely they studied the ink, the more it resisted explanation. Piri Reis himself wrote that he compiled it from 20 maps and 8 Mappae Mundi, some from the time of Alexander the Great. Yet Alexander lived 2,000 years before the first ice sheets we now measure. How could a sailor of the Renaissance inherit knowledge of a world that has been frozen for millions of years? The Piri Reis map is not alone. A century later, Oronteus Phineus, a French mathematician, produced another. Antarctica drawn with rivers and mountain ranges, no ice, no emptiness, as if seen by human eyes. Then came Philippe Bouache, whose 18th century globe divided the southern continent into 2 landmasses separated by a long inland sea. When modern radar finally pierced the ice, it found the same twin structures hidden beneath the frozen crust. Coincidence, perhaps? Yet coincidences tend to dissolve when they repeat too precisely. Scholars proposed safer explanations. Maybe the cartographers extrapolated theoretical landmasses to balance the continents, or imagined a southern pole to satisfy geometry rather than geography. That would be comforting, if not for the mathematical accuracy of the coastlines. The margins align within degrees of modern latitude and longitude, centuries before any ship could have sailed those latitudes alive. Someone, or something, must have seen it before it froze. Each time a new anomaly surfaced, academia grew quieter. Libraries withdrew early facsimiles for conservation. Archives restricted access. The reasoning was bureaucratic, but the effect was ritualistic. A slow covering of knowledge, layer by layer, like fresh snow. What was once an open curiosity turned into an uneasy silence, as if too many questions pointed toward a history that official timelines could not contain. There are older hints still, fragments of memory hidden in myth, Plato's account of a lost land swallowed by sea and ice, Hindu texts describing continents that sank beneath white death, the Dogon people of Mali speaking of star beings who fled from a region where the world turned upside down. Such stories are dismissed as archetypes of catastrophe, yet perhaps they are echoes of something remembered dimly, long before the poles froze solid. Myth, after all, is often geology translated into dream. If one listens to the language of ice, it tells the same story in reverse. Deep within the glaciers, trapped air bubbles reveal epochs when the atmosphere was warm, breathable, lush. Fossilized pollen found in Antarctic rock proves that forests once grew there. And leaves of cycads, plants now found only in tropics, were buried suddenly beneath volcanic ash and snow. It was not a slow freezing, but a shock, as though the planet tilted in an instant, and winter never left. Could a shift of the Earth's crust, a displacement of the poles, have transformed a living continent into an eternal tomb? In 1958, long after the old maps had been dismissed as curiosities, Charles Hapgood revisited them. Using seismic data and magnetic readings, he proposed that Earth's outer shell can slip over its molten core, moving entire continents in a single cataclysm. Einstein, before his death, reviewed the manuscript and called the idea interesting, if not impossible. The theory was buried under ridicule, yet the evidence never fully faded. Satellite data later confirmed that Antarctica's ice moves faster than expected, as though floating on a current of rock, a reminder that even the planet's foundations can drift. When scientists reconstructed the pre-glacial topography from radar, the ghost of an old shoreline emerged. Beaches, river deltas, ancient floodplains. One of them, near Wilkes Land, forms a perfect semicircle around a central depression 30 miles wide. Geologists interpret it as the scar of an asteroid impact, but others notice its symmetry, its depth, the strange magnetic anomalies concentrated precisely at its core. Whatever struck there, or was buried there, seems to distort the instruments that try to measure it. Every few years, a new article appears in some peripheral journal, quietly mapping these oddities before fading again into obscurity. Each publication is met with a polite silence, neither confirmed nor denied. And each time, the question returns, colder, heavier. Why does human history begin so late, when the Earth's surface bears traces of civilizations long before the glaciers came? Perhaps we misread time itself. The ice does not measure in centuries, but in forgetting. Every meter downward erases a millennium. Beneath the oldest layers might lie artifacts ground to dust, libraries compressed into crystals, the architecture of an age that never had a name. To uncover them would be to confront a truth older than humanity, or to admit that humanity is older than we think. Those who have studied the maps up close describe a strange feeling, as if the parchment looks back. The coastline curves too perfectly, the handwriting steadier than any storm-tossed hand could manage. Some report faint impressions beneath the ink, like another drawing erased, overwritten by history's trembling hand. Perhaps Piri Reis was not the cartographer, but the messenger, copying, preserving, transmitting what little survived from a time when the poles still breathed air. The deeper one stares into these maps, the more they resemble mirrors rather than charts. They reflect not the world's geography, but our hunger to know what was lost, and our fear of what happens when we find it. Maybe that's why modern science prefers to look elsewhere. It is safer to study stars than to confront the memory buried under our own planet. Tonight, as the aurora drifts over the sleeping continent, the old maps lie in their glass cases, illuminated by museum light. Tourists pass without noticing. The ink fades 1 century further. Yet somewhere beneath that white expanse, rivers still flow under the ice, following courses drawn 500 years ago by hands that should not have known them. The map is not wrong. It is merely waiting for the ice to catch up. Beneath 3 kilometers of ice, where sunlight has never touched and air has not moved for 20 million years, a hidden ocean sleeps. They call it Lake Vostok, a body of water the size of one of the Great Lakes, sealed under Antarctica's glaciers since before humankind existed. No wind crosses its surface, no ripple disturbs its skin, yet scientists believe it still breathes. A slow, trapped heartbeat of liquid water beneath an empire of frozen silence. It is here, perhaps, that the most profound mystery of the South Pole begins. For decades, geophysicists had suspected something unusual beneath the Soviet Vostok station. Radar echoes bounced back with peculiar delay, as if striking not rock, but fluid. Only in the 1990s did the data confirm it. An enormous lake, perfectly enclosed, isolated from the atmosphere for at least 15 million years. When the announcement was made, the world celebrated a scientific triumph. But the deeper the story went, the more careful the words became. To drill into that lake was to pierce a world untouched since the dawn of the Ice Age. The fear was contamination, that modern microbes might fall into its waters and destroy an ecosystem preserved from prehistory. Yet behind that ecological caution lay another fear, quieter and less spoken. What if the contamination went the other way? What if something ancient, adapted to darkness and pressure, found its way up? The project began cautiously. Russian scientists drilled for years, each meter slower than the one before. They used kerosene to prevent the borehole from freezing. a necessary compromise, but one that made the scientific community uneasy. Every report that emerged was filtered through layers of translation and delay. Some claimed the first samples contained strange filament-like organisms, their DNA unlike any known lineage. Others insisted the results were inconclusive. Officially, nothing extraordinary was found, yet the samples were sealed, shipped, and never released in full. Around the same time, other hidden lakes began to reveal themselves. Mercer, Willans, Ellsworth. An entire network of subglacial water systems connected by narrow channels under the ice, stretching across the continent like veins under pale skin. In total, more than 400 such lakes have been detected, each potentially harboring ecosystems cut off since the Miocene. The Antarctic bedrock, it seems, is not solid but breathing, water moving, shifting, whispering through caverns of total darkness. There is something unsettling about that idea. To know that under the vastest desert on Earth lies an invisible ocean, alive and ancient, is to realize how little we understand our own planet. We imagine exploration as conquest, but here, the ice refuses intrusion. It allows observation, not entry. Every attempt to probe deeper faces a wall of physics, politics, or coincidence, drills that snap, funding that vanishes, instruments that fail. Even NASA's tests of Europa-style probes, designed to simulate alien exploration under Antarctic conditions, are often delayed by logistical issues. One begins to wonder if the resistance is mechanical or metaphysical. In 2012, after decades of drilling, the Russian team finally broke through to Lake Vostok. The moment the borehole reached the water, sensors recorded a sudden pulse of pressure, as if the lake exhaled. Instruments detected a temperature anomaly, a brief spike, and then silence. When the fluid samples were retrieved, they contained crystalline particles, traces of gas, and what the official report called unidentified biological signatures. Later, those phrases were softened to possible microbial contamination. But several team members left their posts shortly after, and some refused further comment. Among the rumors that followed was one particularly strange. A researcher, speaking anonymously to a European journal, claimed that before the data was sealed, a sonar reading revealed a faint geometric pattern on the lake's floor, a series of ridges too regular to be natural. It could have been a glitch, a reflection, a trick of overlapping echoes. But the story spread quietly through scientific circles like a whisper through ice. It would be easier to dismiss such stories if they did not keep repeating. In 2018, during an expedition to Lake Mercer, a probe sent down through more than a kilometer of ice detected faint pulses, rhythmic vibrations not consistent with geological movement. They lasted 3 minutes, then stopped. The official explanation was equipment error, though the recordings were never released. It is always the same pattern. The closer one approaches the untouched, the more the instruments begin to dream. There's an eerie symmetry between these Antarctic lakes and the search for life beyond Earth. Scientists use them as analogs for Europa and Enceladus, moons that may also conceal oceans beneath frozen crusts. But perhaps the analogy cuts both ways. If the same conditions that exist here exist elsewhere, then life below ice may be less of an exception and more of a pattern. Could it be that the first alien biosphere we encounter is not light years away, but beneath our own planet's skin? And if that life is ancient, if it predates us, then who is the visitor and who is the host? Sometimes, late at night in the research stations, when the generators hum and the wind recedes, those who have drilled the deepest describe a peculiar sound. Not quite mechanical, not quite natural. A low resonance that seems to come from beneath the ice, vibrating through the metal of the facility. One researcher called it a heartbeat slowed by 1,000,000 years. It could be the ice shifting, or the deep sigh of pressurized water finding new cracks. But in the stillness of that place, imagination does not feel like fiction. Lake Vostok remains officially sealed again. The hole refroze, the funding diverted, the announcements postponed. For safety, they said. The same explanation that always marks the boundary between curiosity and something else. Some scientists argue that we are right to wait, that disturbing such ancient waters could awaken microbes that have not seen sunlight since the ancestors of humans were small, shivering primates in African forests. Yet, beneath their caution, lies another tone, softer and more uncertain. It is not only the lake they fear disturbing, but the mirror it might hold. If we peer into those waters, we might not just find life. We might find history reflected backward. A reminder that our world, too, once lay warm and breathing where now it lies dead and cold. And perhaps, in that reflection, we'd see ourselves as we truly are. Temporary, brief, another layer of ice forming on the surface of time. Some questions melt when touched, others freeze deeper. And somewhere beneath the South Pole, in darkness so old it no longer knows the sky, the water waits, dreaming under pressure, patient as the planet itself. There are places on the satellite maps of Antarctica where the compass falters. The magnetic lines twist, loop, and scatter like threads pulled loose from the fabric of the Earth. Pilots have long complained that their instruments spin uselessly over these regions, needles drifting in circles, GPS readings dissolving into noise. Scientists call them magnetic anomalies. But among those who've studied the raw data, there's another phrase whispered with unease: the Wilkes landmass. It began, as many discoveries do, with a coincidence. In 2006, a team of NASA and ESA geophysicists analyzing satellite gravimetric readings noticed a peculiar distortion beneath the ice sheet in Wilkes Land, an area roughly 300 miles across, with a mass density far higher than the surrounding bedrock. The anomaly was so dense it tugged slightly on the orbit of passing satellites. The official interpretation was cautious. Perhaps an asteroid impact. Perhaps a concentration of metal-rich minerals. But the numbers didn't fit any natural model. The reading suggested something too symmetrical, too deep, too deliberate. Soon after, magnetic surveys conducted by the European Space Agency found strange wave patterns over the same coordinates, oscillations that did not correspond to solar or terrestrial cycles. The data came and went like breath, rhythmic, patient. Whatever caused it was buried beneath 2 miles of ice, unreachable by any drill. Some called it a crater, others a vault. When the discovery was announced, headlines flared briefly, then vanished. The public was told it was an ancient meteorite site, nothing more. Yet the scientists who worked on the data remained unusually silent. One of them, an Italian physicist, mentioned in an interview that, if this were an impact crater, it would be the largest on Earth and far too recent to fit any known extinction event. The statement was quietly removed from the publication's website within a day. What could generate a magnetic field that intense, stable across time, and buried so deep? Some suggested an iron core fragment, left from the planet's early formation. Others speculated on frozen lava domes, metallic meteorites, or subterranean magma. But deep inside the classified corridors of satellite research, there were murmurs of something less geological, a structure of unknown geometry, a resonance that behaves as though it's listening. The concept of a listening anomaly sounds poetic, even absurd. Yet in physics, certain materials, crystalline lattices, Metallic alloys can resonate with electromagnetic frequencies in ways that amplify or distort surrounding fields. If a massive formation of such material exists beneath the ice, it could, theoretically, act like a natural antenna, interacting with solar radiation, geomagnetic flux, or even human transmissions. In the silence of Antarctica, where radio noise is almost non-existent, such a phenomenon would stand out sharply. A silent receiver waiting for a signal that never comes. During the late 1990s, long before the Wilkes anomaly was widely known, radio operators at the Amundsen-Scott station reported periodic bursts of low-frequency static around 17 kHz. The pulses were irregular but persistent, repeating roughly every 62 hours. The signals were traced to somewhere within the Wilkes sector, but when military satellites were aligned to monitor the region, the bursts stopped. Later, when the attention shifted elsewhere, they returned. No one ever published the data officially, though fragments survive in archived communications under labels like polar noise event and anomalous LF interference. Perhaps these are nothing more than technical ghosts, harmonics from auroral activity, reflections from the magnetosphere. Yet even in their most rational reports, researchers often describe an odd sensation, that the noise doesn't just exist. It feels intentional, as if the continent itself were murmuring through static. We forget that the poles are not fixed. Earth's magnetic field drifts constantly, its north and south wandering across the crust. But at the South Pole, that drift behaves erratically, accelerating without clear cause. Some years it leaps dozens of kilometers, others it halts, as though something anchors it below. In models simulating this movement, the Wilkes anomaly appears again, like a knot in the invisible fabric, pulling the magnetic lines toward itself. What if Antarctica is not merely a frozen desert, but a vault holding something magnetic in nature? An ancient core, artificial or natural, that continues to shape the planet's invisible forces. There are myths in many cultures that speak of sleeping stones, artifacts that hum softly beneath mountains or seas, influencing weather and fate. The Greeks called them omphaloi, world navels. The Tibetans spoke of tsema, life stones that balance energy flows across the earth. Perhaps such legends are not entirely symbolic. Perhaps they are memories of something buried long before history began to count. Scientists have tried to image the anomaly more clearly using ice-penetrating radar, but the readings blur at the same depth every time. A blank zone, where the echoes cancel themselves out. The explanation is mathematical, yet unnerving. A phenomenon called destructive interference. In simpler words, the signals reflect perfectly against themselves, erasing the image. To see deeper, one would have to change the frequency. But each attempt seems to cause magnetic instability in surrounding instruments. The ice, it seems, does not want to be seen through. Occasionally, meteorological satellites detect subtle thermal fluctuations above the Wilkes Land region. Pulses of heat spreading outward, as if the ice breathes. They are faint, periodic, and unexplained. Each time one appears, auroral activity above the continent increases. Some geophysicists quietly note that these cycles correspond uncannily with the low-frequency bursts once recorded at the research stations. It is as though the anomaly below and the sky above converse in a language of magnetism, a dialogue older than sound. No expedition has yet been granted clearance to drill there. The official reason: safety, environmental protection, logistical impossibility. The unofficial one might be simpler. No one wants to be responsible for opening something that the Earth itself has kept sealed. A scientist once described the region as a magnet for secrecy, which, depending on how you hear it, might be literal. When you stand in the polar wind and hold a compass there, the needle trembles as though frightened. Even the human body senses it. Hair rising, heartbeat quickening, a faint metallic taste on the tongue. The ancients might have called it the breath of the underworld. Modernity calls it data noise, but perhaps both names point to the same truth, that something vast and patient stirs below, radiating through time and field, its voice disguised as the static of our instruments. At night, when the aurora bends low over Wilkesland, the sky glows green and violet in slow undulations, like a pulse spreading across heaven. Beneath it, unseen, the anomaly hums in silence, aligning invisible lines of force. And for those who still listen to the recordings, there are moments, brief, impossible, when the static forms a pattern, a rhythm almost like breathing. It may be the planet remembering itself, or it may be something else remembering us. Far below the continent's frozen surface lies a mountain range no human eyes have ever seen. The Gomburtsev subglacial mountains, taller than the Alps, longer than the Pyrenees, are buried under more than 2 miles of ice, as if the planet itself decided to hide them. Discovered accidentally in 1958 by Soviet scientists using seismic readings, they form the heart of East Antarctica, rising and falling in perfect silence beneath an eternal white ceiling. No photograph exists, no direct view. Yet radar has traced their outlines, ridges, valleys, plateaus, all preserved like a mirage suspended in time. The question has haunted geologists ever since. How can mountains that should have eroded millions of years ago still stand so sharp, so young, so alive? By all laws of geology, the Gomburtsev Range shouldn't exist. The crust beneath them shows no collision zones, no volcanic rifts, no tectonic scars. They appear instead like a ghost range, crystalline, faultless, and ancient beyond comprehension. Some scientists theorize that the mountains are the relic of an older continent, the root of an ancient crust reawakened by ice. Others whisper a simpler but stranger thought, that they are not older than the ice but younger, born from the ice itself, carved by pressures so slow and deep that the earth forgot they were moving. In 2009, a multinational expedition finally mapped parts of the range using radar and gravimetry. What they found was unsettling. Beneath the sharp peaks lay broad, flat basins, surfaces too even to be natural. The data suggested liquid water trapped between bedrock and ice, as if a hidden river flowed through the range's core. Yet deeper still, the radar returned perfect silence. No reflection, no echo. The waves simply vanished, absorbed by something unknown. Some called it a technical glitch. Others suspected layers of minerals so pure they devoured signal like light swallowed by black glass. When the findings were presented, a quiet unease spread through the scientific community. Every known mountain range carries a geological lineage, a chain of cause and erosion, sediment and uplift. But the Gomburtsev Mountains seemed born without history, sculpted from nothing, erased of origin. It was as if an artist had drawn mountains directly onto the crust, then pulled a sheet of ice over them like a veil. No fossils, no ash, no sedimentary record, only perfection and absence. Satellite imagery above the region later revealed faint gravitational fluctuations, subtle enough to escape public notice, but consistent over decades. These shifts, repeating every few years, suggest mass movement deep within, something flexing under the ice. Not an earthquake, not glacial slip, but a slow respiration. As if the range itself expands and contracts, like lungs encased in frozen armor. Ancient myths speak of sacred mountains that never meet the sky, In Tibetan cosmology, Mount Meru is said to rise from the world's center, invisible to human eyes. In old Arabic texts, there is Kaf, the mountain that encircles the earth, hidden by the horizon. Perhaps such images are memories of something real, mountains felt but never seen, sensed through magnetic or spiritual tremors. In the Gamburtsev range, those metaphors seem to take form. Mountains invisible, yet undeniably there. Silent, radiant, self-contained. The ice above them acts like a time capsule. Layers upon layers have stacked over 1,000,000 years, sealing the air of forgotten climates. Trapped inside are traces of cosmic dust, ancient bacteria, and radioactive isotopes that tell stories of supernovae, volcanic winters, and solar storms. Yet even among these clues, something doesn't align. The isotopic signatures in the oldest cores from above the Gamburtsev region are subtly different, as though the air that froze there was not quite the same as anywhere else on Earth. Slightly heavier oxygen ratios, slightly distorted carbon cycles, small differences, but persistent. Almost as if the air above those mountains once came from another atmosphere entirely. No human has ever stood upon those buried summits, but instruments have measured faint electromagnetic fields rising from their depths. They fluctuate gently, like the planet's pulse, independent of geomagnetic storms. Some researchers suspect piezoelectric effects, the electricity produced when crystals under immense pressure release charge. Yet that only deepens the mystery. How much pressure must exist there, 2 miles beneath the surface, to keep entire mountain ranges alive with static? In 2011, an American geophysicist described the range as a cathedral built by unknown hands. She meant it figuratively, but the phrase spread like an infection across scientific forums. A cathedral of ice, invisible yet resonant. A sacred geometry locked beneath the world's coldest desert. Later, as her team analyzed thermal data, they noticed something peculiar. At certain frequencies, radar scans produced harmonic overtones, as if the returning signals were singing. The tones weren't random noise. They formed repeating intervals, like the resonant hum of tuned glass. The data was released once, then quietly archived. It's possible, of course, that these harmonics arise from the physics of the glacier, the perfect waveguide of dense ice reflecting radar pulses in rhythmic layers. Yet to those who heard the recordings, the effect was uncanny. The mountains seemed to hum back. Even seasoned scientists described a sensation of presence, as though listening to the interior of the earth. Perhaps that's what awe really is. Not fear, but recognition of something older than the concept of knowing. Some believe the Gamburtsev Mountains are the original seed around which Antarctica's ice began to form. A nucleus of crystallization that drew cold to itself until the entire continent froze around it. If so, then the range is not merely a relic, but the heart of the planet's memory, still pulsing faintly beneath the centuries. Others go further, suggesting that the mountains may conceal deep tectonic structures, or voids, that resonate with the magnetic anomalies of Wilkes Land thousands of kilometers away, as if the two regions are parts of one system, communicating beneath the ice. To imagine that is to picture the continent not as dead rock, but as a living machine, an organism of stone and ice, breathing through pressure, remembering through resonance. If that sounds like mysticism, it's only because we've forgotten that the planet itself is older than our science. The ancients called such places navels of the world. We call them anomalies. Perhaps the difference is only linguistic. Some nights, when the wind drops and the aurora fades, seismic instruments near the Doma Plateau pick up faint tremors from deep below. They last seconds, pulse once, and vanish. Not earthquakes, too shallow. Not glaciers, too deep. The tremors align precisely with the core of the Gamburtsev Range. Each time it happens, the temperature of nearby ice shifts by a fraction of a degree. Some scientists note it, others ignore it, but a few quietly mark the pattern, wondering if the continent itself stirs in its sleep. If those buried mountains could speak, what would they tell us? Perhaps that creation and concealment are not opposites but the same act. That to preserve something perfectly, one must bury it in silence. And maybe that's what the Earth did. Hid its first cathedral beneath an ocean of ice. Not to imprison it, but to protect it from us. When the first fossil was pried from Antarctic rock, it was not what scientists expected. It wasn't the imprint of a fish or the bone of a mammal, but the leaf of a tree. Delicate veins perfectly preserved in shale, as if plucked only yesterday. It belonged to Glossopteris, a fern-like plant that once covered the southern continents in lush forests. That single fossil, found where no tree has grown for 40 million years, changed everything. It proved that Antarctica had not always been a frozen wasteland. It had once been green, alive, and breathing. Before the ice, the southern world was warm and humid. The continent was part of Gondwana, joined to Africa, India, Australia, and South America in a supercontinent that stretched across the southern hemisphere. Ancient rivers cut through valleys, lakes shimmered under summer skies, and forests of mosses, ferns, and towering trees swayed in polar sunlight. Even in winter, when the sun dipped low for months, the world was not cold. It was temperate, vibrant, filled with life forms now long vanished. Then, something happened. The warmth collapsed into silence. Fossilized trunks are found lying flat, as if knocked down in a single storm. Layers of volcanic ash appear abruptly in the geological record, followed by a blanket of glacial debris. The shift was not gradual. It was sudden, violent, and final. Temperatures plunged by tens of degrees in less than a millennium. Rivers froze, forests petrified, and within a geological instant, the continent became a tomb. What could cause such an immediate freezing of an entire world? The conventional answer points to the movement of continents. Plate tectonics drawing Antarctica over the South Pole, cutting it off from ocean currents. But some details do not fit. The fossils suggest climates too stable, transitions too rapid. Magnetic readings from the rocks hint at disruptions in Earth's field, as if the poles themselves had shifted. This has led a few researchers quietly to revisit old and controversial ideas: crustal displacement, magnetic reversal, or even impact events so large they tilted the planet's axis. At the core of one ice shelf, samples show a peculiar anomaly. Layers of microscopic glass spheres fused into the snow, consistent with the fallout of a global firestorm. They date to roughly 12,800 years ago, the Younger Dryas boundary, when the planet briefly plunged back into glacial cold after thousands of years of warming. If that event struck the northern hemisphere so violently, might its echo have reached the southern pole, triggering a final lock of the Antarctic ice? Some scientists suspect it did. Others suggest something even older, that the first glaciation of Antarctica, 34 million years ago, began with a chain reaction set off by massive volcanic eruptions beneath the ocean, releasing aerosols that block the sun. But perhaps the cause lies not above, but below. Antarctica sits atop one of the planet's largest networks of volcanic systems. More than 100 identified volcanoes, many buried under ice. Some still release heat, invisible from the surface, their plumes detected only through satellite radar. It's possible that an ancient eruption melted the continent's equilibrium, releasing vapor that cooled the skies and summoned the first endless winter. It's also possible that those volcanoes were not the cause, but the symptom, that the Earth, strained by forces deep within, erupted as a way to heal itself. Whatever the cause, the record left behind is haunting. The fossils are not scattered evenly. They occur in pockets, as though certain areas resisted freezing longer than others. In some sites near the Transantarctic Mountains, petrified wood still bears tree rings, the measure of seasons that no longer exist. Under magnification, the last rings are narrow, compressed, the mark of dying years. They tell of a planet that fought against the coming cold and lost. Paleontologists have even found evidence of amphibians, labyrinthodonts, creatures with ribs like armor, who once swam in Antarctic swamps. When they vanished, nothing replaced them. The silence that followed was total. Not even bacteria could endure the cold that came after. The continent entered a sleep that has lasted 30 million years. Yet, as recent studies show, that sleep is not as deep as we think. Beneath the ice, radar scans reveal fossilized river channels still intact, evidence that liquid water once flowed only a few meters below the surface. Some of those channels may still contain brine or microbial life adapted to sub-zero extremes. Scientists drilling near Mount Achernar have recovered microbial DNA sequences that do not match any known genus. They are simple, silent, yet unmistakably alive. If life can survive 30 million years of burial, what else might still breathe down there? It's almost poetic. The same ice that destroyed life also preserved it. The glaciers became both executioner and archivist, erasing history while sealing it intact. Every fossil found is a contradiction, a memory of warmth trapped in eternal cold. The deeper we dig, the more the paradox grows. What if the extinction of Antarctica's forests was not an accident of nature, but a deliberate reset? A mechanism the planet uses to rewrite itself when its balance is broken. There are legends, distant echoes, of worlds swallowed by snow. The Inca spoke of Viracocha, the god who brought a flood of frost. Norse sagas describe a fimbul winter, a great freezing before the end of the world. Even Plato's dialogues mention a sudden change in the heavens that froze lands and drowned others. Could these myths be fragments of ancestral memory, recollections of a real event long before recorded time, when the world tilted and the southern lands vanished under white silence? In the fossil record, there is a peculiar absence. No transitional species bridging the lush world and the frozen one. One layer, green and alive. The next, barren and empty. It's as if the planet turned a page, skipping whatever came between. Some scientists call it the fossil silence. To others, it feels like censorship, as though nature has redacted her own history. When night falls over the ice, researchers at McMurdo Station sometimes hold up leaf fossils to the light of their lamps. The veins glow faintly through the stone, an ancient photograph of a vanished sun. Some say it feels almost sacred, as if holding a message from another world. In that moment, it's impossible not to wonder, did the planet freeze itself to protect what it remembered, or did it freeze to forget? Some silences are natural, others are chosen, and somewhere beneath those mountains of glass and stone, a lost forest sleeps, its roots buried in ice, its memory breathing faintly in the dark, waiting, perhaps, for the warmth to return. Deep beneath the glaciers, scientists began to extract something stranger than fossils. Strands of life so small, so ancient, they seemed to whisper from before memory itself. In the cores of ice pulled from kilometers below the surface, genetic fragments emerged. Bacteria that had not seen the sun in 500,000 years, viruses perfectly preserved in frozen air bubbles, and unidentified DNA sequences that matched nothing on record. They called it biogenic residue, a neutral term to soften what it really was. The biology of a forgotten age. The first discovery came quietly. In 1999, a joint Russian-French expedition studying ice cores from Vostok Station isolated a series of single-celled organisms that revived when thawed. Their structure defied normal classification. Some contained unusual lipid membranes resistant to both cold and radiation. Others reproduced slowly, as though time itself moved differently for them. Genetic analysis revealed that these microbes shared less than 10% similarity with any known species on Earth. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then, as always, the results were inconclusive. Later studies in other subglacial lakes found similar traces. Microbial colonies frozen in crystals of salt and mineral dust, suspended in perfect stasis. When warmed under sterile conditions, a few began to metabolize again. Not grow, not multiply, just breathe. Like creatures half awake, remembering how to live. It's as if the ice remembers its own chemistry. One researcher said, her voice almost reverent, but DNA has a way of carrying ghosts. Within the genetic material extracted from Antarctic samples were patterns so alien that bioinformatics software could not read them. Codons arranged in repeating symmetry, forming palindromes, loops, self-reflecting sequences. To most biologists, this meant nothing more than error or mutation. To others, it was something deeper, a sign that life here had evolved under conditions completely separate from the rest of Earth. Viruses, too, emerged from the ice. Perfectly preserved, still infectious to certain bacteria, their capsids glittered like glass under the microscope. Some carried genetic signatures suggesting they once infected complex multicellular hosts that no longer exist. Their age was impossible to measure, though isotope analysis placed them at least 1 million years old. These findings hinted at a biological continuity that transcended extinction, as though Antarctica had kept a library of evolution hidden beneath its frozen skin. There's a paradox in studying such life. To awaken it is to risk erasing it. The moment ancient DNA is exposed to oxygen, light, and modern microbes, it begins to degrade. So researchers work in darkness, sealed in filtered chambers, dressed in sterile suits like priests tending relics. The air hums with caution. Every breath feels like a trespass, and yet, despite all care, accidents happen. In 2017, a laboratory freezer at Concordia Station failed during a storm. When the power returned, several samples had thawed. Most were destroyed immediately, their contents sterilized. But a few were said to have liquefied into a translucent amber gel, shimmering faintly under UV light. Nothing was officially reported, and the logs for that week were later revised. Still, rumors lingered among the winter crew, of a faint odor like ozone and of static that clung to the walls for days. It's tempting to treat such tales as exaggeration. Isolation breeds mythology. Yet something about them resonates with a deeper pattern. Life beneath the ice behaves not as if extinct, but patient. It does not die. It waits. Its chemistry slows beyond our comprehension, until time itself becomes irrelevant. When we thaw it, we do not resurrect it. We interrupt it. Somewhere between biology and myth lies a strange thought. What if the ice itself is alive in a way we cannot measure? Not conscious as we understand it, but responsive. A global organism storing and releasing memory. Each glacier, each frozen cell, a neuron in the planet's mind. In that sense, the DNA found in the ice is less a fossil than a thought, a sentence preserved mid-syllable, waiting to finish itself when warmth returns. The oldest ice cores contain trapped gases that still hold traces of ancient atmospheres, air from worlds before humanity. Mixed within are tiny specks of organic carbon, remnants of once living things. When analyzed, their isotopic ratios show signs of repeated cycles of oxidation and reduction, as though they have been thawed and refrozen multiple times. Could it be that the ice has melted and reformed in secret rhythms, breathing life and death across eons? Some researchers suggest that viral particles frozen for millions of years could one day re-enter circulation as the planet warms. They call them paleoviruses. To others, they are sleeping archives. The concern is not only biological risk, but philosophical weight. If these entities awaken, they bring with them not just infection, but memory, reintroducing codes of existence the planet had long buried. Perhaps the true danger is not disease, but recollection. The return of a genetic vocabulary from an era when life itself spoke differently. One study, published briefly before being withdrawn, hinted at something stranger. When certain fragments of subglacial DNA were exposed to infrared light, they emitted a faint luminescence, an energy signature more akin to mineral fluorescence than biology. Some saw it as contamination. Others wondered if ancient cells had evolved to convert radiation directly into energy, bypassing sunlight altogether. If true, it would mean that life could thrive not by photosynthesis, but by geosynthesis, feeding on the Earth's inner heat, the quiet warmth of creation. Imagine such organisms, sealed in the dark for millions of years, absorbing the planet's pulse like a prayer. When modern humans arrive, drilling and burning, the ice shudders awake. To it, we must seem like fever, a brief spike of heat across an otherwise endless calm. The question, whispered among biologists who no longer speak publicly, is not whether these organisms can survive us, but whether they have already adapted to do so. At night, in the sterile labs of the polar stations, vials of ancient water sit under soft blue light, humming faintly with cold. Researchers study them through glass, afraid to breathe too close. Outside, the wind screams across the plateau, but inside there is only the steady rhythm of instruments and heartbeats. Each drop of that meltwater could contain the seed of an ancient ecosystem, or the echo of something far older, a code that once shaped life and might shape it again. The ice holds no malice, only memory. But memory can be dangerous when it wakes in a world that has forgotten how to listen. And if the DNA beneath Antarctica carries even one fragment of what the planet once was, not human, not animal, but something in between, then perhaps it is not the ice that waits for us to explore it, but we who wait for it to remember. Long before anyone drilled into the ice, Antarctica was already speaking. The continent has a voice, not loud, not human, but a deep, resonant hum that seeps through the air when the wind dies. For decades, scientists dismissed it as background noise, the groan of shifting glaciers, or the sigh of wind tunneling through crevasses. But recordings made in the past few years have revealed something stranger. Beneath the constant whisper of snow, there is rhythm, a pulse repeating through the ice, too slow for the ear to notice, too precise to be random. They call it the singing ice. The discovery began almost accidentally. In 2015, a network of seismic sensors placed across the Ross ice shelf detected harmonic tremors, low-frequency vibrations oscillating in patterns that repeated every few minutes. When the data was sped up, the ice seemed to sing, a haunting chorus of rising and falling tones, like the breathing of an immense creature sleeping beneath the snow. Each note corresponded to movements of air trapped in layers of compacted snow, resonating as temperature and wind shifted. The explanation was simple, elegant, and comforting. But as often happens in Antarctica, comfort did not last, because the rhythm did not stop when the wind did. Even in still weather, when no air moved across the shelf, the tremors continued. Their frequency shifted subtly with time, sometimes aligning with magnetic fluctuations, sometimes with nothing at all. It was as if the ice were reacting to something beyond itself, a force deeper, slower, older. Some researchers compared it to the resonance of the Earth's crust, the Schumann resonances that hum between the planet and the ionosphere. Others noted that the Antarctic song sometimes drifted slightly out of sync with global patterns, as though it were a separate heartbeat. Sound, in the polar world, behaves differently. The density of cold air and the rigidity of the ice bend vibrations in ways that confuse instruments. Voices echo twice, footsteps sound distant, even silence seems to carry weight. Researchers who spend winters on the continent often describe the same phenomenon. When they stop moving, they can hear faint tones, like glass vibrating just beyond perception. It's a psychological trick, perhaps. Isolation playing with the mind. Yet, when those experiences are compared with seismic readings, they often match. The same frequencies, the same intervals, the same hidden rhythm. Somewhere below the surface, something is vibrating. In 2018, hydrophones lowered into subglacial lakes recorded acoustic anomalies, clicks, pulses, and low drones rising from the bedrock. They did not correspond to tectonic movement or water flow. Instead, they resembled modulated tones, the kind of patterned energy normally associated with engineered systems. The official explanation, when the data was published months later, referred to pressure resonance in trapped gas pockets. But in private, several researchers admitted the recording sounded like communication, structured, repetitive, deliberate. A few fragments of those recordings leaked online, distorted by data compression, but still uncanny. Listeners described them as metallic whale song or the world dreaming in Morse code. The frequencies hovered between 18 and 30 hertz, below human hearing, yet capable of resonating in the body. When played at higher speeds, they formed almost melodic shapes, crescendos, decays, pauses, returns. Music without composer, breath without lungs. It's possible, of course, that these are illusions of pattern recognition. The human brain seeks order, especially in chaos. But every illusion, like every echo, has a source. And the more scientists listened, the more they realized that Antarctica's voice seemed to answer itself. Vibrations in one region would be followed hours later by corresponding tremors thousands of kilometers away, as though the continent were transmitting signals through its frozen veins. NASA and ESA have long studied the polar regions as natural amplifiers of electromagnetic phenomena. The poles act as gateways through which solar energy enters Earth's magnetic field, creating auroras and radio emissions that can circle the globe. In 2019, a satellite monitoring these emissions recorded an unexpected pattern. Bursts of very low-frequency radiation centered exactly over the South Pole, repeating every 12 hours. They were too regular to be random, too weak to be artificial. Self-oscillation of ice plasma, the report concluded. Yet for those who had heard the singing ice, the phrase carried another meaning. The planet humming to itself, keeping time with the rotation of the sun. Inside the research stations, scientists began to experience subtle disturbances. Metal walls would tremble faintly without wind. Electronic devices occasionally picked up static bursts, synchronized with seismic activity. Audio recordings captured whispers of sound outside the range of human speech. Faint murmurs, layered like overlapping voices. When slowed down, they resolved into tones eerily similar to those of the ice itself. Some dismissed it as interference. Others began to wear earplugs at night. It's strange how quickly the mind turns cosmic in isolation. When the world around you is nothing but white, you start hearing meaning in every shadow. Yet not all perceptions can be explained away. In 2020, a team at Dome Sea Station noticed that after every strong solar flare, the frequency of the Antarctic hum would shift upward slightly. A phenomenon that should not occur if the vibrations were purely mechanical. The implication was extraordinary. The ice was responding to the sun as if it were a receiver, tuned to celestial radiation. Perhaps it's only natural. Ice is crystalline after all, structured, geometric, sensitive to vibration. Billions of microscopic prisms interlocking like circuits. Under pressure, ice becomes piezoelectric, converting mechanical stress into electrical charge. Scaled up to continental dimensions, Antarctica could function as the largest natural resonator on Earth, an instrument of unimaginable size, playing itself through the rhythm of planetary motion. But if that's true, what melody is it playing? And who, if anyone, is meant to hear it? Some have proposed that the Antarctic hum might be a planetary feedback mechanism, a way for the Earth to regulate its internal balance. Others speak, more metaphorically, of a message, a reminder that the planet is not inert matter, but consciousness at a different scale. The ancients believed the world had a voice. We, with our instruments, may have simply found a way to record it. At McMurdo Station, a geophysicist once played a sped-up version of the Ross Ice Shelf recordings over the loudspeakers. Those who heard it said it felt less like sound and more like memory, a forgotten song rising through the body, equal parts beautiful and unbearable. It was quickly stopped. The next day, all external speakers were disconnected for maintenance. The recording was archived and never replayed. The Earth sings and we pretend not to hear. Perhaps that is the real mystery of Antarctica. Beneath its silence lies a sound too ancient to decipher. The vibration of a memory older than life, repeating endlessly beneath the frozen crust. We measure it, we graph it, we name it. But names are only nets thrown across the sea. The song remains, carrying through ice and stone, through time itself, reminding us that silence is only another kind of speech. And sometimes, when the aurora flares and the wind stops completely, if you listen hard enough, not with your ears, but with the quiet space inside your chest, you can feel the world still singing beneath your feet. A sound like distant breathing, a voice without words. Every map tells a story, but some stories are told by omission. The first explorers who charted Antarctica drew what they could see: coastlines, cliffs, mountain shadows, and left the rest blank. It was only centuries later, when satellites traced the continent from orbit, that those blank spaces began to fill. Yet even now, parts of the South Pole remain curiously uncharted, erased by data smoothing or hidden behind digital fog. When you zoom in far enough, the surface pixelates into white silence. The maps end not because the land does, but because something, or someone, has chosen not to show it. At first, it seemed innocent. Image stitching errors, clouds, optical artifacts, all perfectly reasonable explanations. But the omissions persist across multiple satellite systems, even those operated by different nations. Certain coordinates, particularly those over Wilkes Land and near the Doma Plateau, appear censored, replaced with algorithmic snow. The rationale is environmental protection. a measure to prevent overexposure of sensitive ecosystems. Yet it's difficult not to notice how those same regions coincide with magnetic anomalies, subglacial lakes, and restricted zones under the Antarctic Treaty. It's as if the digital Earth itself obeys the same silence that guards the physical one. Cartographers call it the white filter, a polite term for the deliberate flattening of data. The idea that humanity could map every inch of Mars but not its own planet's southern crown feels absurd, almost ritualistic. The last truly unknown frontier is not in space but below our feet, hidden by bureaucracy and code. Even in the age of open information, Antarctica remains an exception. Satellite archives that offer public data elsewhere impose special conditions here. Limited resolution, restricted access, redacted layers. When one European university released high-definition elevation models of the continent in 2019, the files vanished within weeks, replaced by corrected versions. Those who downloaded the originals described anomalies, geometric depressions, unusually regular formations under the ice, ridges that formed patterns too symmetrical to be natural. Officially, they were processing artifacts. Unofficially, they became the cartographic equivalent of forbidden archaeology. In this digital age, erasure is subtle. We think of censorship as black lines across text, but the new method is gentler. Interpolation. Fill in the missing details with averages, smooth the irregularities, make the unknown look harmless. The blank zones of Antarctica are not empty. They are curated silence, the aesthetic of ignorance rendered by algorithm. It's easy to forget that maps have always been political. Each line is a decision, each coordinate a claim. During the Cold War, the Antarctic Treaty divided the continent into invisible slices, each belonging to no one and everyone at once. Research stations mark their presence like quiet flags. Yet beneath the surface, sovereignty still hums. Nations keep separate databases, their own seismic logs, their own restricted maps. What we call neutral science often hides a cartography of possession. A climatologist once remarked that Antarctica is the only place on Earth where global cooperation truly exists, but only because no one can live there long enough to own it. Perhaps that is the real reason the maps stay blurred. The moment clarity arrives, ownership follows. And ownership, like warmth, melts everything it touches. Still, the data leaks through in fragments. A few independent researchers, using unfiltered radar returns from earlier missions, noticed something strange near the Transantarctic Mountains. Straight lines beneath the ice, kilometers long, aligned perfectly east to west. The patterns resemble fissures or channels, yet their spacing and uniformity defy natural explanation. When one scientist attempted to publish these findings, his paper was returned with a request to remove features inconsistent with topographic norms. He did. The journal approved. The lines vanished again. There is a pattern to all erasures. First, curiosity, then confusion, then silence. The same rhythm plays out across disciplines: archaeology, geology, climatology. Questions that begin as anomalies end as omissions. It's not always conspiracy. Sometimes it's exhaustion. People grow tired of asking what the system refuses to see. But beneath the academic quiet, fragments remain. A few retired satellite technicians have hinted that certain data layers are automatically redacted by the image processing algorithms, not by human decision, but by design. Threshold filters, they called them, mathematical parameters that remove anything too sharp, too angular, too reflective. One even joked, "The software knows what it shouldn't see." He laughed when he said it, but not entirely as a joke. And so the maps we trust most, those glowing seamless projections of Earth, are not complete portraits, but edited dreams. They show the surface, never the depth. They reveal light, not shadow. Antarctica exists there only as the idea of a continent. White, clean, empty. The perfect image of nothingness. But in truth, the more we map it, the less we know. Some historians of science have compared this to the old medieval taboo against drawing paradise. The closer humanity came to mapping the whole world, the more one corner had to remain blank, a necessary void to preserve mystery. The South Pole, in that sense, is our last sacred absence. A place we pretend to study but secretly need to keep unknown. Because perhaps if we filled every gap, if every coordinate were revealed, we would lose the sense that there's still something greater than us left to find. Yet technology does not sleep. New satellites peer deeper each year. New sensors trace what others missed. One day, inevitably, the veil will thin. And when that happens, the question will not be what we find, but why it was hidden for so long. Imagine the moment the first true map is drawn. The ice stripped away. The bedrock revealed in all its detail. Imagine discovering that the lines we thought random form a pattern, that the mountains align with magnetic poles, that the subglacial lakes trace constellations mirrored from the sky. Would we still call it coincidence? Or would we, for a brief, trembling moment, sense that the planet has been speaking in geometry all along? Maybe the real map of Antarctica isn't one drawn by human hands, but one drawn through us. A map of our own blind spots, our fear of knowing. The erasures we find on satellite images might not be censorship at all, but reflection. The white space of our own mind projected onto the world. Still, the question remains, if the continent hides nothing, why must it stay blurred? If there are no secrets beneath the ice, why does the data fade precisely where the anomalies lie? Perhaps it is safer that way. Perhaps the Earth, in its infinite patience, has learned that truth must arrive slower than curiosity, so the maps will stay smooth. The coordinates will stay incomplete, and we will keep staring at the blank whiteness, pretending not to notice the faint outlines beneath, like faces pressing up from under glass, waiting for someone brave enough to see them. There are moments in Earth's history when the compass loses its mind. Rocks in every continent carry magnetic scars, frozen directions that no longer align with the current poles. These reversals, preserved in iron minerals, tell of epochs when the planet's magnetic field flipped, north becoming south, south becoming north, as though the Earth itself exhaled and began again. Most people think of these events as slow, taking thousands of years, yet some evidence suggests they may happen in days. Catastrophes measured not in ages, but in sunsets. If that is true, then Antarctica, the continent of silence, may once have stood somewhere else entirely. The idea of crustal displacement, that the Earth's outer shell can shift over its molten interior, dragging continents to new latitudes, was proposed in the 1950s by Charles Hapgood. He argued that the poles were not fixed, but wandering. According to his calculations, a massive imbalance of ice could cause the crust to slip several degrees, relocating entire continents in an instant. When Hapgood sent his theory to Albert Einstein, the old physicist replied that the idea was not impossible. That single phrase, cautious, almost reluctant, has kept the hypothesis alive ever since. Most scientists dismiss it now, preferring the steadier model of plate tectonics. But Antarctica refuses to fit neatly into that framework. Its sudden glaciation, the fossil silence, the ancient forest petrified mid-season, all suggest a change too abrupt for slow drift. Something happened that tore the world's equilibrium apart. Paleomagnetic studies of sediments near the Transantarctic Mountains reveal directions of magnetization inconsistent with their current position. The rocks point not south, but east, as if the land once faced the equator. In 2017, an analysis of ocean floor cores taken near the Ross Sea found that magnetic north had shifted thousands of kilometers in less than a millennium during the late Pleistocene. No one can explain how. Some geologists whisper that the planet has a hidden rhythm, a pulse of reorientation triggered by mass redistribution. Ice accumulates at the poles, gravity wobbles, balance breaks, and the crust slides, locking again in a new configuration. To the biosphere, it would appear as apocalypse, tsunamis the height of mountains, continents drowning, climates reversing overnight. To the planet, it would be nothing more than the adjustment of a breath. If the Earth truly moves in this way, then Antarctica may once have been tropical. Its lush forests, the amphibians, the ferns, not ghosts of another world, but memories of itself, displaced. When the crust slipped, the warmth vanished, the sun's path changed, the air froze, and an entire ecosystem was entombed where it stood. There are hints of this in mythology, buried beneath metaphor. The Egyptian priests who taught Solon the story of Atlantis said the catastrophe came when the heavens turned round in the opposite direction. In ancient Chinese records, it is written that the sun once rose where it now sets. The Hopi legends of North America speak of a time when the earth tipped over twice, flooding the world and burying the poles in ice. Perhaps these myths are fragments of the same memory, recollections of a global shift, half buried beneath allegory and dream. If the poles have indeed moved before, they may move again. In recent decades, scientists have observed the magnetic North Pole racing across the Arctic at an accelerating pace, 40 kilometers per year, heading toward Siberia. No one knows why. Some call it geomagnetic drift, others call it warning. Beneath the frozen surface, the planet's liquid iron core is churning faster than ever, its flows unstable, chaotic. Should the field collapse completely, even briefly, the Earth would be exposed to solar radiation on a scale unseen by civilization. Satellites would fail, power grids would collapse, navigation would dissolve. In mythic language, the sky would fall. But it is the silence of the South that concerns some researchers most. The magnetic pole there, deep under the Antarctic ice, has shown fluctuations that defy known models. Sudden leaps, reversals, returns. It is as if the magnetic soul of the planet trembles beneath the weight of its own memory. A few scientists have privately wondered whether the Wilkes Land anomaly, that dense metallic mass buried deep below, could be the anchor, the pivot around which the planet turns when it resets its orientation. If that's true, then the South Pole isn't just the end of the world. It's the hinge on which the world turns. There's a strange elegance in the thought that the Earth might periodically forget itself, that every few million years it wipes its coordinates clean and begins again. To living things, it would seem cruel. To the planet, it would simply be renewal. Maybe that's why the continent feels sacred, in a way science can't quantify. It's not just frozen land. It's the scar of motion itself, the place where memory and amnesia meet. Seismologists studying Antarctica's subglacial crust have reported curious discontinuities, thin layers of low-density rock sandwiched between heavier ones, as though the planet's skin has slipped and refrozen multiple times. Some even compare the pattern to growth rings in trees, each marking a displacement, a turning of the world. In that light, the ice is not just preservation but punctuation, the pause between one age and the next. When one looks at the planet from space, the poles seem so still, so perfect. It's easy to forget that they are illusions of balance. Beneath that stillness, everything moves. Magma, magnetism, memory. Perhaps the reason we cannot truly explore beneath the South Pole's glaciers is not technological, but temporal. We are not meant to reach something that is still in motion, still deciding where the world should face. Some researchers speculate, half in jest, that the continent is slowly migrating again. Satellite gravimetry has recorded minute shifts in mass distribution, as if the ice were subtly sliding eastward, dragging the crust beneath it. The displacement is microscopic but real. Maybe it is the beginning of another turn. Or maybe it is just the echo of the last one, replaying itself through frozen time. If the poles do move again, no human will witness the full event. It will happen on a scale too large, too slow, too magnificent. Yet we might feel its tremor in the air, its warning hum beneath the feet. A subtle vibration that tells us the Earth is remembering the shape it once had. At night, the aurora coils around the pole like a serpent of green fire, its light pulsing with unseen rhythm. The ancient ice glows faintly beneath it, reflecting colors that no language can name. To stand there is to feel both awe and insignificance, to sense that the ground beneath you is not solid, but dreaming. Maybe the poles are not boundaries at all, but mirrors, points where the planet contemplates itself, flips its reflection, and starts anew. And perhaps when we stare too long into that white abyss, what we feel staring back is not emptiness, but the memory of motion, the quiet promise that even silence can turn the world. Long before humans could measure ice, they remembered it. Every culture carries a story of a flood, a freezing, a sudden erasure. In each myth, the message is the same. Something once thrived, then silence fell. The Greeks spoke of Phaethon, the reckless son of the sun god, who scorched one hemisphere and froze the other when he lost control of his father's chariot. The Maya told of successive worlds destroyed by flood and fire before ours began. The Sanskrit texts describe pralaya, cycles of dissolution where the earth sinks into sleep, only to be reborn when the gods awaken. Perhaps these are not metaphors at all, but encoded memories of the planet's convulsions, recollections of when warmth fled south and the heart of the world turned to ice. In the myths that survived the longest winters, there is always a whisper of something beneath the cold, a hidden city, a buried temple, a light that never goes out. The old Tibetan texts call it Agartha. Norse sagas name it Niflheim, the misty realm beneath the world. To scholars, these are symbolic landscapes, projections of the unconscious. But when the continent of Antarctica was first revealed, many felt an uncanny familiarity, as if the maps were sketching a place humanity had already dreamt. Could it be that what ancient minds imagined as an underworld was simply the memory of a continent that vanished beneath snow? Modern science, too, holds its own creation myths, written not in verse, but in data. The ice cores tell a tale of cataclysms, sudden spikes of carbon dioxide, abrupt collapses in temperature, layers of volcanic ash so fine they shimmer like black glass. Each event marks a fracture in continuity, times when the world seemed to erase and restart. It is tempting to see these not as accidents of nature, but as part of some larger rhythm, a planetary heartbeat measured in extinction and renewal. Antarctica is the purest symbol of that rhythm. Every layer of its ice is a page of the Earth's autobiography, but one written in reverse. The deeper we go, the further back the story recedes, until words become pressure, until history becomes silence. The continent is memory turned to matter, and perhaps that is why it resists us, because to pierce it too deeply would mean piercing the archive of everything the planet has chosen to forget. When ancient philosophers wrote of world ages, They describe them as cycles of loss, golden eras replaced by silver, then bronze, then iron. Each age a little darker, a little more forgetful. The end of each was marked by a cleansing, an elemental reset, fire for some, flood for others, ice for the rest. Our modern understanding of geology, with its slow turns and slow deaths, feels gentler. But perhaps the truth is harsher, that the Earth erases in order to survive its own memory. There are strange consistencies in myths of global deluge, details that bridge oceans and epochs. The Hopi elders of the American Southwest speak of ant people, who sheltered humankind underground during a cosmic winter. In Hindu cosmology, Vishnu sleeps on a serpent in the primeval sea, while the universe dissolves into water and ice. The Sumerians wrote of Utnapishtim's ark, surviving a flood sent to reset creation. Always, there is an instruction, a way to preserve what must not vanish. Perhaps the ice serves that purpose too. It freezes not only matter but meaning. If that's true, then beneath the South Pole may lie more than geology. Some of the oldest myths hint at repositories, seeds of knowledge buried to outlast the cataclysm, waiting to be found when humanity grows quiet enough to listen. A few archaeologists, dismissed as fringe thinkers, have noted how certain ancient monuments align with polar coordinates that no longer match their current orientation, as though they were built when the Earth's axis was different. If Antarctica was once temperate, if civilizations lived there before the tilt, then the ice might indeed conceal the ruins of our first forgetting. Satellite radar occasionally detects geometric echoes, straight lines, rectangular voids, repeating angles beneath miles of glacier. Officially, they are data noise, processing errors. Unofficially, they have fueled decades of speculation about what was buried before the freeze. The human mind cannot resist the temptation to see intention in symmetry. But even if those patterns are natural, they carry a quiet message. The planet itself builds architecture in stone and ice, a design that mirrors its own internal logic. It doesn't need us to be its builders. We are merely the latest tenants of its long, patient memory. What fascinates scientists most is not what's frozen, but what moves. Deep radar scans show that even the oldest ice slowly flows inward toward the continental heart, carrying with it dust, rock, and the remnants of extinct worlds. The glaciers are conveyor belts of history, pulling the surface down into the deep, compressing time into a single mass. To dig into Antarctica is to cut through time itself. Every chip of ice is a fossil of air, a molecule that once brushed the leaves of a forest that no longer exists. And yet, there are moments when the ice seems to respond, when seismic instruments record sudden pulses, or when buried lakes breathe warm currents through their sealed catacombs. The continent feels less like a grave and more like a sleeping organism. Could it be that what we call memory of ice is not static preservation, but active dreaming? A cycle through which the planet replays its past in order to rehearse its future. Sometimes when storms clear and the sky turns the color of old glass, the horizon above the South Pole seems to waver. Light bends in impossible ways. Mountains appear and vanish. Mirages shimmer where no land exists. Scientists call it refraction. The ancients might have called it revelation. The world remembering another version of itself for an instant, then closing its eyes again. In this light, the idea of forbidden exploration gains another meaning. Perhaps we are not prevented from entering the depths of Antarctica because of politics or peril, but because the planet itself maintains a kind of boundary. It is protecting its own sleep. To awaken the full memory of the Earth too soon might be to unbalance the dream we live in. If we think of the planet as a vast consciousness, then Antarctica is its oldest memory, the one buried deepest, the one it recalls only in whispers. Each aurora that dances across its sky is a flicker of thought, each seismic pulse a slow turning of its mind. The ice is not dead, it is remembering, and maybe that's why those who visit there so often describe the same sensation. Not fear, not awe, but recognition. The feeling that the world beneath their boots has seen them before, that it remembers their shape, that long ago, before the continents drifted apart, before humanity had a name, they too stood there, under a sun that shone on forests instead of snow. Perhaps what we call prehistory is simply the part of memory the planet keeps for itself. Perhaps the ice has always been the boundary between what we are allowed to remember and what we are meant to forget. If you stand long enough at the edge of the world, you begin to sense that something beneath the ice is watching back. The South Pole is not empty. It is aware, not in the way a creature thinks, but in the way an ancient sea remembers every wave that's ever touched it. For all our instruments and satellites, we are still only guests on its frozen skin, moving across a surface that has outlived every story we've ever told about it. And the strangest thing is not that we cannot see what lies beneath the glaciers, but that they seem content to see us and remain silent. Every attempt to uncover Antarctica's secrets seems to end the same way. Equipment fails, funding evaporates, data disappears. The excuses vary: technical errors, contamination, budget cuts. But the pattern doesn't. It's as if each discovery gets close enough to wake something, and the Earth quietly intervenes, closing the wound it opened. Some call it coincidence. Others suspect something older than coincidence: the planet's own reflex of preservation. The modern world likes to think it has no mysteries left. We've mapped the genome, photographed black holes, measured the age of light itself. Yet the silence beneath the South Pole remains intact, untouched, inviolate. Perhaps that's what makes it unbearable. That the one thing left beyond comprehension is not distant, but right here, sleeping under our feet. If the ice were to melt completely, the secrets it holds would not just rewrite history. They might erase the idea of history altogether. For what would it mean if we discovered proof that civilization has begun and ended more than once? That humanity is not the first intelligence to rise, but merely the latest echo in a much older conversation. There are theories, whispered among scientists who no longer publish, that certain isotopic irregularities found in ancient ice cores cannot be explained by volcanic or cosmic events. The ratios hint at a kind of combustion that should not exist in nature, as if some great fire once burned in a world now frozen, a chemical signature of technology without a name. If that is true, then the ice does not hide prehistory. It hides recurrence. The same pattern, the same ambition, the same forgetting, repeated across aeons until the Earth itself learned to press reset through ice. Maybe that is why, even now, we can't truly explore under the glaciers. Not because the conditions are lethal, not because the treaties forbid it, but because the story there is not new. The ground remembers, and memory has rules. In the 1970s, a French glaciologist stationed at Dumont-d'Urville Base recorded a series of strange infrasound vibrations during the long polar night. The source was traced to somewhere deep below the continental plateau, an irregular throb repeating every 11 minutes, synchronized with nothing known. When the data was later reviewed, the pulses had stopped. The only thing left on the tapes was the faint crackle of wind and something that sounded almost like breathing. The researcher died years later, insisting to colleagues that the continent was alive in a way we don't understand. His papers were never translated. Such stories drift like snow, light, fleeting, easily buried. But sometimes they settle. In 2019, a seismic monitoring station near Dome Fuji registered a sequence of tremors spaced exactly 108 seconds apart, lasting for 3 days. The pattern did not correspond to glacial movement, nor to tectonic activity. It was too regular, too deliberate. When plotted as a waveform, it resembled a spiral, inward turning, endlessly recursive. The data was quietly archived and never released to the public. The official statement described it as a harmonic anomaly of no geological significance. Yet to those who listened to the recording before it was sealed, it sounded eerily like a voice clearing its throat. The deeper we look, the more the Earth behaves like something aware of being observed. Its signals shift when we measure them. Its anomalies retreat when we chase them. Perhaps that is not coincidence. Perhaps consciousness, whether human or planetary, survives only by mystery, by keeping a part of itself hidden from understanding. And maybe that is what the South Pole represents. The mind of the Earth turned inward, preserving its oldest dream from the noise of civilization. A vault of memory so profound that even to uncover it would be an act of forgetting. Every myth of paradise lost begins the same way, with someone digging too deep. The Greeks called it hubris, the sin of those who mistook curiosity for dominion. In that sense, Antarctica is the planet's most perfect warning. It stands in silence, patient, untouched, a mirror for our own restlessness. It shows us that even in a world we've charted to its edges, the most important things remain unmeasured. Not because they can't be, but because they shouldn't be. Sometimes, at the end of a long polar season, the researchers who overwinter begin to dream differently. They speak of hearing faint whispers in their sleep, voices that seem to come from beneath the station floors, murmuring in languages no one knows. They wake to the sound of their own names spoken softly, almost lovingly, by the wind. It's just isolation, they say, or the brain inventing company in a place where nothing moves. But others wonder if the mind, stripped of distraction, simply becomes more sensitive to the thoughts of the world itself. The ancients would have understood. They spoke often of sacred silence, of the spaces where gods still think. To them, a mountain, a cave, or an icebound desert was never empty. It was inhabited by memory. In that sense, every glacier is a kind of prayer, an offering of time back to the planet, a way of letting the Earth dream without interruption. Perhaps that's why, when you stand on the polar plateau, you can feel a strange calm. There's no horizon, no noise, no sense of scale. Only a whiteness so absolute it feels like standing inside thought itself. The air is thin, the sky a sheet of glass. The world becomes weightless, transparent, reduced to the essential: breath, heartbeat, light. You begin to realize that this place doesn't need discovery. It is discovery, the reminder that not everything meant to be known was meant to be touched. And somewhere beneath you, in darkness older than bone, the ice shifts again. Slow, patient, alive. Not a secret waiting to be solved, but a silence choosing to endure. The truth of Antarctica is not that we can't explore it, but that it doesn't need us to. It will outlast every map, every theory, every empire of curiosity. It is the memory that refuses to be rewritten, the mirror that will remain after the rest of the world has melted away. One day, when all our satellites fade and our instruments go quiet, the continent will still be there, breathing in the dark, holding whatever it has always held. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the mystery was never meant to be solved, but only to be heard. like a distant echo in the sleep of the world.